I apologize for last minute last week, but I was a bit under the weather. You would not have wanted to be in my shoes or anything else that week. So I didn't, I actually was really out of it. Anyhow, we're back together and we will continue with our schedule. Of course, what I'm going to do tonight is when we get to, all right, I'm going to do today's the 10th of February, Ben Adam L'Chaver, Jewish ethics, and we'll figure out how we can catch you up on the history. Maybe I'll record something. You guys can look at it in your leisure. All right, we'll work on that. But in any case, first we will start with the weekday Torah portion, which I'm going to just touch upon very briefly. Last week would have been more fun because that was Parshat Yitro. It has the 10 Commandments in it. Aseret HaDibrot. This week continues with a legal material. It's called Mishpatim, Ela Mishpatim. These are the judgments, these are the laws and things that were necessary for everyday life. Now, some of them seem strange to us. It begins with talking about laws of servitude. English is sometimes translates it as a slave. Translate it in here. Mishpatim, Exodus. Translate it. When you acquire a Hebrew slave. Actually, a terrible translation. The word Eved can mean slave, but in this case, since it calls in Hebrew Eved Ivri, a Hebrew slave, it was an indentured servant. And the rabbis later on understood it to mean usually that it was a situation in which a person had been a thief and he couldn't pay back what he had stolen, so the person was sold for a period of servitude for 6 years. In the 7th year, they would then go free, as mentioned in this week's portion and in next week's. That is versus what is referred to elsewhere as Eved Knani, which means a non-Jewish slave. Slavery was part of the ancient world. The Bible understands that's part of the nature of the world in which Israel existed. And it sought to at least control it. And there are various laws we find in different places that tried to ameliorate the situation. But an Eved Knani was a person who was actually owned their body, their labor, everything. They were owned by their master. An Eved Ivri, a Hebrew servant, male, we'll come to the ladies in a moment. Their service was owned by the master for a period of time. And when he sets them free, when they go free at the end of that period of servitude, he has to give them a lot of possessions, give them some money and stuff. It's an interesting phenomenon. Now, what is contrast with that is the next passage, which also is very foreign to our modern world, and that's the female Hebrew servant. And there it seems that the intent was, as the woman had to be a younger woman, she had to be underage, and she was sold by her father essentially to become a second wife or a lower level wife. In the world of polygamy, you had such things. And he had to treat her fairly. You read the passages, you'll see. But then then we have a lot of laws that are not usually seen in the modern eyes as being laws dealing with religion. What happens if my ox gores your ox? Who's responsible? What kind of responsibility do I have as the owner? If the ox is ever gored before, if I have a dog that bites, is a dog and bites all the time, I got greater responsibility in the modern world. Similarly, the Bible recognizes that. So we have those kinds of laws. They are the jurisprudence of everyday life of the ancient world. Because for Judaism, there's not a distinct separation between theology in daily laws. The Bible makes no distinction between ritual and daily and what we call tort law today. So it's all part and parcel of the same package. So that's this week's Torah portion. But also, this week we begin a cycle of special Torah portions. There are 4 passages that are read on the Shabbat, on 4 Sabbaths preceding Nisan, the month of Pesach. So the first Shabbat, or just before the first Shabbat of the month of Adar, which we are entering into this Friday and Shabbos, we read what is called Parshat Shekalim. It's a passage that talks about the shekel, or the half shekel, really. The Torah prescribes that you can't count people, but every adult male need to be counted for knowing who's there in terms of army service and military, things like that. So every adult male Jew was supposed to give a half shekel to the temple. This was followed for many, many centuries. Even during Roman times, there was money was sent from throughout the Jewish world, from Rome, from Iraq, modern day Iraq, to Jerusalem as this half shekel, and that was used to purchase sacrifices in the temple for the community of Israel. And later on, after the Jewish revolt of 70, the Romans still insist upon Jews paying the shekel, but they went to the Romans, I believe. All right? But throughout Jewish history, there's been a maintenance of this idea. And so since the shekels for the new Jewish year cycle of sacrifices begins in the month of Nisan, a month before, they would remind people by reading this passage about the need to raise the shekels. Okay, shekalim, which is also now the modern name for Israeli money, is a shekel. Okay. Then the Sabbath, the Shabbat before Purim, is called Shabbat Zachor, and we read the passage from Deuteronomy that talks about remembering what Amalek did to you when you left Egypt, how they attacked the weak and the stragglers of the Israelites. And that's connected, as we will see when we talk about Purim next week, to the holiday of Purim through the chief villain Haman and his ancestry. So it's read prior to the week in which Purim falls.
I didn't understand that.
Sorry, Bixby, I wasn't talking to you. All right. Then it depends if it has to have, I'm going to go to the end of the month first, because we may have a break depending upon how many Sabbaths there are following in the month. At the end of the month, just before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we have the Parsha of Shabbat HaChodesh. HaChodesh is Rosh HaChodeshim, the beginning of the idea of presenting the new moon, the counting of the months, and the original mitzvah of taking a lamb for the Passover sacrifice. And then the week before that is what we call Shabbat Parah, the Sabbath of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer. And that is meant as part of a ritual purification rite, that's double usage. There's a ritual that was used to remove ritual impurity from the Israelites. And since the Passover sacrifice is around the corner, it was a reminder to prepare yourselves for Passover in a state of ritual purity. So those are the 4 special Shabbatot, special readings that we have. And then there's a Haftarah, a passage from the prophets that parallels that Maftir Aliyah. So for example, this coming Shabbat is one of the few times a year that we take out 3 Torah scrolls. We're going to take out one Torah scroll for the weekly Torah portion of Mishpatim. We take out a second Torah scroll for Parshat, for Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, because that's also on Shabbat. And we take out the Torah portion, another Torah for Parshat Shekalim, the portion that we read about the half shekel. And so it's interesting in the Talmud when they talk about it, the reason we take out 3 Torah scrolls is because you shouldn't have to wait while we roll from one portion to another. And the Talmud calls that tircha de tzibura, causing too much problems for the congregation. Have to sit idly while you're rolling a Torah scroll from one place to another. If a synagogue doesn't have enough Torah scrolls, then they may have to roll. So it's interesting that the needs of the community, of the congregants, is something that comes into play. Interestingly enough, there's been some literature been written lately because of the nature of synagogue services during the pandemic, both in the United States and in Canada, and how a lot of synagogues have had to do various kinds of shortening of services. Maybe that's going to mean in the future services are going to have to be shorter in any case because congregants aren't going to put up with it for long services. I don't know. We'll see. I'm waiting to get back to shul. I haven't been able to go to the synagogue at all. What's the matter, Rosalind? Doesn't appeal to you? No. Looks like you were making a face at that. Okay. You gotta be careful if you're on.
No. I was just saying that I subscribe to the Canadian Jewish newsletter, and every week it's like there's something about some synagogue or yeshiva breaking COVID rules. So that's what I was just.
That is a serious problem.
Talking about.
It is. It is a very serious, terrible problem.
Yeah, every week it's like a whole bunch of things popping up in the newsletter about it.
It is, and then it's in the nature of the religious approach. Now, not all Orthodox are careless like that, but especially in the Haredi community, that has been a very big problem. Part of it is because their lifestyle centers around the synagogue and the Beit Midrash, the synagogue and the school. I mean, their whole social life, everything, in particular if they're just if they're studying in a kollel or something like that, and they don't even go out to work in another thing, their whole life is collapses around them, and so they've had a difficult time dealing with it. Some of the very important, very pious Orthodox Haredi rabbis have said, you have to listen to the rules. Others have kind of like that sort of thing. So yeah, you're right to be a little skeptical on that. It's a shanda. It is a shanda. Shanda, a nice Yiddish word. You know what shanda is? Something very embarrassing. Something very not nice. It's a real shanda, because what happens is the virus goes up in those communities, and then they get blamed for it spreading around. On the other hand, they've had a high rate of it in the very Orthodox community, and seem to survive relatively well. But there have been a large number of very important rabbis who, in this very Orthodox world, who have succumbed to the COVID virus. And what can I tell you? I haven't been this. The last time I was in synagogue was Purim last year. Because of my history, I avoided even when there were some things available for it. I'm waiting for my vaccination, and when it's all clear, hoping also see my grandchildren, everybody from New York, because we haven't seen them forever. So okay. But in any case, as I said that about the synagogue services being impacted by this whole story, and also the whole question of what one does to fulfill the special mitzvot that were these Torah readings, all of those are happenings in the Jewish world right now. All right, I want us to go on with our Hebrew. And so let's see, I'm going to share the screen. Okay. Everybody see all right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we did this 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, the letter Vav, right? That was the last letter we did, I believe. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I just want to really review it quickly because we're going to, on the next page, come across a very special, difficult situation. Okay, so the letter Vav, when it has, as a consonant, it has a V sound, Va, as in mitzvah. Okay, and we're not going to go through it because we did that last week, but I just wanted to remind you. So like here, Vadaut, Vador. Okay, in this case, it's Ufratz. Okay, because you have a dot in the middle. Right? So that's the Vav. That is nothing new, but I just wanted you to remind you of it because it's been a couple of weeks and because of what we find on the next page. Now, the letter Vav originally was just a consonant with a V sound to it. Thus the word mitzvah right here, okay? It's very clear to see how it's pronounced, mitz, and then va. The problem comes in when we come to the next word, which is the plural form of mitzvah. And it is pronounced not mitzot, which you normally would think it would be, but mitzvot. Okay? In modern Hebrew spelling, Israeli spelling, they actually usually often add a letter extra vav to have two vavs here. So you know the one's a consonant, the other's a vowel. But how are we to read it when we come across it? How do we know how to read this as mitzvot and not mitzot? Well, the real way of knowing it is when the letter in front of it has that vowel under it, the schwa vowel. Then the letter that follows is going to be a consonant. So the only way that can be a consonant is if it's pronounced vo. The dot on top is the O vowel on top of the vav, which is acting as a consonant. Does anybody not understand that? Any problems with that?
Mhm.
Okay. So thus it says we read mitzvot as if it were written mitzvot. And make it easier in modern Israeli spelling, I believe they do often do that. But that's not what you're going to find in traditional spelling and traditional sidurim. All right? The word mitzvah, commandment. The root of it are three letters, tzadi, vav, and hey. And the meaning of that is command or order. So in our blessings, we have Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, who is sanctified as by his commandments, mitzvotav, his commandments, vitzivanu, and commanded us. Or b'mitzvotav, through his commandments. Also note how when you have the end, like, Tav Yud Vav like that is going to be pronounced Tav. Okay. The Yud kind of drops out in the sound. Maybe once upon a time it was pronounced as Tav, but we now just pronounce it as Tav. So let's look at the blessing for the lighting of Shabbat candles. So everybody unmute yourselves if you're muted. I'm still waiting for a few people to unmute themselves. I want to hear your wonderful voices. Caitlin is still not unmuted over there. Fernanda, and Sarah. All right. Okay. So let's read together. It's Baruch
Baruch
Atah
Atah
Adonai,
Adonai,
or Adonai, it depends how you want to pronounce it. Eloheinu,
Eloheinu,
Melech
Melech
Haolam,
Ha'olam,
Asher
Asher
Kiddushanu
Kiddushanu
B'mitzvotav
B'mitzvotav
V'tzivanu
V'tzivanu
Lehadlik
Lehadlik
Ner
Ner
Shel
Shel
Shabbat.
Shabbat.
So now,
Hmm.
that is the blessing we say on lighting the Shabbat candle. If it's Yom Tov, it would be the same thing, except instead of Ner Shel Shabbat, it'd be Ner Shel Yom Tov. And Hanukkah, Ner Shel Hanukkah. Right, so the words here that are new to us that you are coming across, lahadlik means to light, to kindle. The word ner, usually people think of as candle, but it really means a lamp of any kind. It can be an oil lamp, it can be a candle lamp, right? Ner, shell of, right? The light, this candle of, and then Shabbat. Shabbat. Okay. All right. Go on to the next page. This is our homework assignment. You all have these pages. I want you to write the meaning. I haven't spent a lot of time, on meaning of words. Occasionally I'll throw something out just to make it a little more interesting. But these words are really very important to remember. Because, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu is the introduction to every blessing for the performance of a mitzvah. And the last four words are the particular mitzvah that we're dealing with. So I want you to be able to translate these words.
Okay.
So that's, let's say if I put it on a test in a couple of weeks, you would be able to translate them. Normally I don't push the translation, but these are so important. Okay? So that's your homework assignment. You can really figure it out. If you can't figure it out from what we've done, you got real trouble. Okay? So last page we're going to look at. We're going to review what we've had. Okay? So we have line number 1, everybody. We have meats. The meats. Vote. The meats vote.
Okay.
It's meets vote, right? Because we have the shva before the o. The last one is tav. Tav. Right? Line 2, we have again tav. The meets vote tav. B'tzivanu. Lehadlik. Kav. Kav. Line 3, we have luach. Remember, because you have the vowel there, and under the chet at the end of a word is pronounced as ach, not cha. Okay. Luchot. Kerach. And kedem. Last Shabbat, we read about the Luchot Habrit, the tablets of the covenant. Luach can mean either calendar, can mean a tablet. And the 10 Commandments, Seret Dibrot, also referred to Luach HaBrit. When Moshe comes down carrying the 2 Luchot, and what happens when he gets down to the camp, we'll read eventually, he throws them down and breaks them. Okay, line number 4. Tzarut,
Root.
Tzriach,
Tzriach,
Tzricha,
Tzricha,
Tzrif,
Tzrif,
Tzorech,
Tzorech,
and Moshe.
Moshe.
Remember, here's where that vowel is serving 2 purposes, as a vowel O and as the dot for the shin. Okay, line 5, we have Makif,
Makif,
Kuf,
Kuf,
Shelcha,
Shelcha,
L'Takain,
L'Taken,
Tikkun.
Tikkun,
You may have heard the expression Tikkun Olam, fixing the world. That's Tikkun.
Tikkun,
And Tarath.
Tara, Tara,
Okay, line 6. Kodesh,
Kodesh,
Shediber, Shediber,
Bear,
Bear.
Degel,
Degel,
Rodef,
Rodev.
Tzedek,
Tzedek,
Tirdof.
Tirdor.
There's a famous expression in the Torah, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Righteousness, righteousness you shall pursue, run after. Line 7. Dagan,
Dagan,
Dodi.
Dodi,
Those of you who are sitting there with a partner can turn to your partner and say, Dodi, my beloved, or my good, very close friend.
Dodi, my very good friend.
Or
More than Dodi's.
Dodi's a bit more of a lover, though. Okay. Dodech,
Dodech,
just a friend is a chaver. A chaver is a friend.
Dodech,
Lich,
Dodaich,
Daich,
Lich,
Dorenu,
Dorenu,
Daka.
Daka. Un segundo.
Just a minute. Rega achat, 1 minute. Just a moment is a daka. Daka is a minute. Sarif,
Serif,
Lich,
Ish. Shrika,
Rika,
Sharach,
Shalach,
Sheretz.
Sheretz,
You don't want to come across any sherets. They're kind of creepy crawling things. Shtaim.
Shtaim,
2. All right. Yishta,
Ishta,
Yesharta,
Yeshata,
Shtok,
Ishtok,
Yirkod,
Yerkod,
and Rikud.
Likud,
That means dance. A dance. Line 10. Shema,
Shema,
Echad,
Echad,
Adonai,
Adonai.
Adonai,
Adonai.
Yiyeh,
Yeah.
not Yihi, is Yiyeh, not Yehiyeh. Yiyeh. Okay, but it's Yi, right? Yeah. And last one is Shaddai, Almighty. Shaddai, another name for God.
Shaddai.
Okay. Stop sharing. We're all through sharing. Okay. Enough for next week. Okay. Tonight I wanted to talk about what we call Ben Adam L'Chavero, between one person and another. Traditionally, we talk of two kinds of mitzvot. Ben Adam L'Makom, between a person, literally between a man and the place. The place is another name for God, right? Between one person and God. All of the ritual laws, the laws of kashrut, the laws of tefillin, of talit, of tefillah, of prayer. All of these are ben adam l'makom, are mitzvot that are, we talk about our relationship to the divine. But there are also mitzvot ben adam l'chavero, mitzvot between people, how we treat other people, ethical behavior, the way we should be. And so, you know, the word moral principles or the ethics of a culture, the rules of conduct, you know, that we recognize as the way people should behave. And sometimes we have very clear understandings of what is ethical. Sometimes we don't. We'll come across one of those interesting situations and trying to understand. Maybe I'll talk about the book later. All right. So let's look at some ideas. The Talmud says that one of the sages, Rava, said, at the time the person enters into judgment, meaning after this lifetime, the heavenly court says to him, did you do business faithfully? The first question they will ask is not, did you keep kosher? Not, were you Shomer Shabbos? But did you practice business ethics? In other words, the first thing is how we interact with people. And we know that you can be a ritual observer, observe rituals, and then violate moral codes. And that's not right. As Rosalind pointed out earlier, we were talking about behavior in the COVID situation. That's not being ethical when you ignore what everybody is being told to do to prevent the spread of disease. So I want to look at certain ideas that we will find in the ethical tradition of Judaism. And most of these have parallels and questions that are asked in modern literature. You know, what's the right thing to do? All right. Now, let's take the case of the innocent bystander. Let's say I'm standing here and I see a person who's being in danger of being victimized by a crime, or they've fallen into the river and they need to be saved. What is my responsibility? What is my ethical obligation towards that person? Now, since Jewish tradition sees everything in a halachic light, in a legal light, we can turn to some of the law codes to see how they deal with such an issue. So Maimonides says the following: if one person is able to save another and does not save him, he transgresses the commandment, neither shall you stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. It says in Leviticus that you cannot stand idly. When somebody is threatened, you have responsibility towards that person. Similarly, if one sees another drowning in the sea, or being attacked by bandits, or being attacked by wild animals, and although able to rescue him either alone or by hiring others, does not rescue him, or if one hears heathens or informers plotting evil against another or laying a trap for him, and does not call it to the other's attention and let him know, or if one knows that a heathen or a violent person is going to attack another, and although able to appease him on behalf of the other and make him change his mind, he does not do so. Right? You can intervene to kind of prevent the happening. If one acts in any similar way, he transgresses in each case the injunction, neither shall you stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. So Maimonides begins by telling us in this passage that there are obligations that we have. And he's careful the way he words it. If you can save him, if you can't save him, you're not guilty of anything. If you can get other people to save him, you have that responsibility. Right? And he goes on, and I'm going to explain this in a little more detail in a moment. Although there is no flogging for these prohibitions, in rabbinic tradition, they understood if there's a negative commandment in the Torah, normally the punishment is you get a beating, a whipping, flogging. Right? If you want to go into it, we'll talk about it another day if you're really interested into the laws of flogging, or if you're into S&M also, but that's for another time. Okay, I know, bad jokes. Everybody complains about my bad jokes. Okay. I was reading about the death of the actor. What was his name? This past week. He was in The Sound of Music.
Christopher Plummer.
Christopher Plummer. And apparently he hated Sound of Music and used to refer to it as S&M. Okay. I read that. I read that in the Globe and Mail. If it's in the Globe and Mail, it's got to be true, right? Okay. All right. So Maimonides goes on to say, although there's no flogging for these prohibitions because their breach involves no action, you're not doing anything, the offense is most serious. For if one destroys the life of a single Israelite, it is regarded as he destroyed the entire world. And if one preserves the life of a single Israelite, it is regarded as though he preserved the whole world. Okay. Now, Maimonides finishes it by citing a Mishnah. That Mishnah, as Maimonides cites it, has a problem with it to the modern ear. Because he says, doesn't say who saves a single life. He says who saves a single Jew. Okay? So we're going to explore a Mishnah in this passage for a moment and see how Judaism has to work with some of these difficult passages. So the Mishnah is in Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin deals with the courts of law. And while we, in the ancient world, and even still in the modern world in some places, capital punishment is a reality. And the Bible permits capital punishment for certain crimes. Now, it's also true that there was a lot of negative rabbinic opinions about capital punishment. I'll come back to it in a minute. So so in the Tractate of Sanhedrin, when it's talking about cross-examining witnesses and warning witnesses, the court they were not jury trials, they were trials by judges. So it says, how do you warn the witnesses? When it comes to witnesses dealing with capital cases, they would bring them in and they would warn them and say to them, lest you heard about this, or you heard it from somebody else, or you heard it from somebody who you think is trustworthy. Or maybe you don't realize that in the end, you're going to be examined carefully to make sure that you're telling the truth. All right, so that's the beginning. It says, warn the witnesses, this is serious. We're going to check you out. And now comes the important part. You should know that the laws dealing with capital cases are different from the laws dealing with cases of injury or torts, money. When it comes to monetary cases, if a person gives money and he can be redeemed by it. In other words, let us say I falsely testified that Joe owes Cindy $50. They find out, so what happens? I got to pay the $50 back to Joe, right? And that covers it, right? I injured him by treating him with $50, by being a false witness. So I can rectify the situation. But that's when it comes to monetary cases. But when it comes to capital cases, his blood, that is the person who gets executed, and the blood of all of his ancestors that would have come from him until the end of the world are lost. For we find that when it comes to with Cain in the Bible, when Cain kills Abel, it says the bloods of literally the bloods of your brother are crying out. The Hebrew word damim, usually we say dam, singular. In that case, it uses dameh, the bloods of your brother. Why the plural? Meaning his blood and the blood of those who would have come from him. In other words, not only did Cain kill Abel, but he killed everyone who would have descended from Abel. Right? So that's the first thing. Now, another interpretation. He says, because we'll skip that. Then it goes on to, therefore, was a human being created only as an individual, right? In Genesis, we are told in the first chapter of Genesis, Zachar nekeva barot, male and female created them. And then in Genesis 2, we're told he makes Adam, and from Adam he takes the rib, or the flesh, and creates Chava. So why do we have only one individual? All the rest of the animal kingdom is always in pairs, the Torah says. But when it comes to, in the Torah, it says there's only one individual. Right? So it says, to teach you that whoever destroys one life of Israel, one Jewish life, is the Torah ascribes it to him as if he destroyed the entire world. And whoever saves one Jewish life, the world accords it to him, gives him honor as if he preserved the entire world. And secondly, he says also because of peace amongst creation, so no one can say my father was better than your father. Right? So first we'll analyze this. It says, first it says, why was there only one individual created? You should expect so. He destroys one life, as if they destroyed the entire world. What does Israel have to do with this? There are no Yidden. There's no Jews at that time. There's Adam and Eve. There's Cain and Abel. And furthermore, at the very end of it, it says, so no one can say my father is better than your father. If you're going to say it's only talking about saving Jewish life, how can you then at this end of that passage says that no one can say their father is better than any other father, than anybody else's father? So there are two versions of this. One version has the word Israel in it, which makes it very narrowed down. And the other version has Nefesh Achat, just one life. I don't know for sure what is the historically accurate reading, but I prefer the more universal reading, which makes more sense. Yeah. So using that, and also because of peace, and we'll come to it later on also, there is a principle in Jewish law of shalom bayit, of making peace at home, and mipnei darchei shalom, because of the ways of peace. And one of the things that we have an obligation to do in this world is to try and always find ways to keep the peace amongst everyone. And so when we distinguish between one person and another person, we eliminate the possibility for really having a peaceful world. Okay. All right, so now,
Rabbi,
yes,
I have a question about this. I read somewhere, I don't remember where, that it is permissible to lie just to keep peace.
yes,
Is it true?
that is true. There's an argument between the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. Ketsa marakatim lifnei hakala. How do you dance and praise the bride? So Beit Shammai, who's kind of a narrower vision of the world, you praise her the way she is. And Beit Hillel says, no, she's a wonderful, beautiful bride. And they say, it doesn't make any difference which, although I've never seen a bride that wasn't beautiful. I've done a lot of weddings over the years and they're all beautiful brides. But Hillel is saying, you don't have to be blunt and say that, you say that nice way. To save a life, you can certainly lie. Unlike Kant, Kant has a problem with lying. Those are into philosophy. I'm just reading a little bit about Kant the other day. If truth is always the ultimate ideal, then you always have to tell the truth, even if somebody suffers as a result of it. That's not what Jewish tradition says. Now, you can't lie to cause injury to somebody, but you are, under certain circumstances, allowed to lie to protect them. Another famous story says that Aaron, Moses' brother, was considered to be a person who always looked for peace. Rodef Shalom, who pursued peace. So if two people had an argument, they were having a fight over something, Aaron would go to one of them and say, the other guy is sorry, but he's embarrassed to apologize to you, but he's sorry about the argument. And then he would go to the other guy and he says the same thing to him, that the other fellow is sorry, but embarrassed to say anything to you, and make peace between them. Neither one said anything about being sorry. Okay? So yes, so Mark, you're correct in that way.
Thank you.
So now, the principle of not standing idly by on the blood of your neighbor is found in the following context. You should do no unrighteousness in judgment. You shall not respect the person of the poor, nor favor the person of the mighty. But in righteousness shall you judge your people. If you go to court and the judges are sitting there in judgment, and one guy is a very wealthy person, and the other guy is a very poor person, you must treat them equally. You can't say to the rich guy, have a seat, and the poor guy, make him stand up. You can't show more respect to the rich guy than to the poor one, or vice versa. And when you reach a judgment, the judgment has to be based upon what is the correct law. You can't find in favor of the poor man because he's poor, or in favor of the rich man because he's rich. Not allowed to take a bribe, etc. Now, a good judge might say to the rich man, you're in the right. You certainly can demand payment from this other guy, but he doesn't have anything. Don't you think you should let him go and forget about it? And indeed, it says the rabbis were supposed to try and find ways of reaching a compromise without having to go to an actual judgment, if you could. Always find a way of compromising and making things work out better rather than going to the ultimate. Now, so we cannot, so this idea found in the Talmud is an ancient idea. And, you know, it's like what, based upon the story in the New Testament, what they call the Good Samaritan. Right? That we have an obligation when we can help somebody to help them. It's a moral obligation. It's not a legal obligation, but it's an ethical obligation. And so, you know, similarly, it says, how do we know that you have to save somebody else's life? Another way of understanding is, if you find something that it was lost, you're supposed to return it to its owner. That's a legal statement. Again, you know, it's a positive commandment. You can't get punished for it. Similarly, if you can restore a life to another person, that's at least, you know, the same as property. So certainly you have to do that. So number one, when it comes to weighing one life against another in terms of, not weighing one life against another, when a life is at stake, you have a responsibility to do what you can to preserve that other life. Now the question might be, to what extent? How far do you have to go? Right? Is self-sacrifice an ethical duty? Okay. Do you have to be prepared to give up your life to save another life? The Talmud says no. But, you know, we have the following. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak, by a majority vote, it was resolved in the upper chambers of the house of Nitzcha and Lida that in every other law of the Torah, if a man is commanded, transgress and suffer not death, he may transgress and not suffer death. Right? If a guy comes up and holds a gun to your head and says, eat that ham sandwich or I'll shoot you, I'm allowed to eat the ham sandwich. I can't enjoy it, but I can eat it to save my life. But if he wants me, all right, the exception to that is, according to the Talmud, idolatry, worshiping idols, incest, which, you know, various forms of sexual transgression, and murder. Mark asked about lying to save a life. Yeah. Am I allowed to kill somebody else who's innocent to save my life? No. As the rabbis understood, you can't say that your life is better than that other person's life. Is your blood redder than that person's blood, is the famous statement. Similarly, if you're going to cause injury, terrible injury to an innocent person through rape, through murder, those are equated as being incest. These are things that you have no right to preserve your life by doing such a thing, and ultimately to worship an idol, to worship, go against the divine commandment of not worshiping other gods. What's also interesting here, though, is now what does it mean on a practical level? Certainly, when it comes to idolatry, even though we know that the Talmud expects you not to worship an idol, we know that the Jewish communities are almost always relatively forgiving when somebody felt forced into such a situation to save their life. There are others who would not. Right? Similarly, if a woman was confronted with rape, most know, although in theory maybe she should be committed to give up her life rather than submit. Again, The authorities in theory say that, but in practice were much more different in terms of understanding a person in those circumstances. Killing an innocent life, that's, I'm not sure that I've seen anything that would say anything differently. Now, an innocent life does not mean I can't defend myself. If a person comes up to me and tries to kill me, I'm allowed to save my life, even if it means I have to kill that other person. Because they're threatening me. They're a road knife. They're a pursuer. They don't have the right to say I can't save my life through the act of killing them. On the other hand, I don't have the right to simply kill them. If it can be done in a way without killing them, that is preferable. Another one of the famous Talmudic cases, it has its parallels in many other cultures. It talks about if two people are traveling in the desert and they have enough water for only one person to survive. If the one person drinks the water, they can get to civilization. If both drink it, they'll both die. What's the ruling? So one of the sages, the son of Batura, says it's better that both should drink and die rather than one should behold his companion's death. Ben Batura says, I don't think you can save your life if it means the other person's going to die. So, but, you know, therefore you share the water because you both got the same circumstance. Rabbi Akiva says, no, it says in the Torah that your brother should live with you, meaning your life takes precedence over his life. Live with you, not before you, instead of you. So Rabbi Akiva says, you know, the one who has the water, he has the right to drink it. There are differences of opinion on this passage, but there are, you know, both statements make a certain sense. You know, do I sacrifice my life for the other person? Should I give him the water to drink? Well, then he has the same obligation to turn around and give me the water to drink. So I have a problem there. You know, you drink. No, you drink. You drink. You know, it's like two guys going through the door. You go first. No, you go first. So finally, a third guy comes in and walks through. But so Rabbi Akiva gives us that answer, but I know it was clearly debated, and it was not as simple as. Although generally speaking, most rabbinic opinions seem to side with Rabbi Akiva in their analysis of it. Because after all, is it better that two people die, or is it better that only one person dies? You know, one of a modern version, version of that. There's a what is it? I have to look at the book's name later on. It's a modern ethical quandary. You're right on this. There's a train tracks, and you're at the top of a hill, and there's a train coming by, and there are no brakes, and there are 10 people at the bottom of the hill, and if the train doesn't stop, it's going to kill the 10 people. Next to you is this very fat guy. And if you push him onto the railroad tracks, he will cause the train to miss killing the other 10 people. What is the ethical thing to do? I'm not going to answer because I don't know what the answer is. I think that the rabbis in general would probably say, you have no choice in this. You can't do it. It's one thing when you're not actively causing another death. But to actively cause the death even of an innocent person, to save the life of more innocent people, how can you make that decision? Who knows, maybe this fat individual will be the father or mother of a great scientist that will end up coming up with a theory of some medication that will save millions of lives. How do you know? But that's one of the important understandings, that it's not always a simple answer. You know, of course, Spock was, what does Mr. Spock say? The life of one, the many takes the precedence over the life of the one, or something like that. But so do you have to give up your life to save another life? No. What risk do you have to take? A reasonable risk is an obligation upon a person. In other words, you know, there are times when somebody's drowning and I can't reach, you know, I remember my old life savings, reach, throw, row, go. If you reach them, you reach them. If you can't reach them, you throw the life preserver. If you can't throw the life preserver, you row out in the boat. Only the last thing you do is you go in the water yourself, because that's more dangerous. But if you're a good swimmer and you're confident of yourself and that you can handle the situation, then you would have an ethical obligation to go. If you can't do it that way, then the other three methods are what you can do. But, you know, it has to be, you know, it's like in war. Can you save the other guy who's been shot? Do you risk your life to save him? You know, on the one hand, you might say no, because after all, you may end up with 2 dead people. The other side might say, well, no, well, you might end up with 2 live people. Another one might say, well, wait a minute. What would you want them to do for you? What would be best for everyone? To just abandon wounded in the battlefield, or to make efforts to save them? So, you know, you have to be able to weigh the danger and analyze the situation. Easy if we're sitting here right here now analyzing it. In the moment, it may not be so easy, obviously. So one of the rabbinic sages was saying, if a tyrant says to a Jew, allow me to amputate one of your limbs, or, you know, your hand, let's say, or else I will kill this other person. Some authorities say he's obligated to allow his limb to be amputated since he would not die. This was in the early 14th century, Rabbi Menachem Rekanati. He says, a life, your limb. You won't die from that. So maybe you have a responsibility. Not everybody agrees, but it does fall into the area of the question of transplants. Let us say I have a family member needs a kidney transplant. It's uncomfortable for me. There's a level of danger for me. Do I have an ethical obligation to donate my kidney? And certainly, according to Rekanati, that would be an obligation that you have to follow. If that is the case, then we get down to the modern world, in which we will talk about it more later on in the year, about organ donation. But if a live person has an ethical obligation to be prepared to give up an organ to save another life, shouldn't we say then a dead person's organs should be able to be used to save another life. And indeed, that's opinion of a lot of modern rabbis. But that is one of the things that we have to do. But this in itself is an interesting whole pages are written on this particular topic, but we won't go any further on that. Now, when we talk about our obligations to society and ethics, I want to talk about a couple of concepts. These are very important. The first one is the idea of lifnei sar balei chaim, causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. The Torah tells us that we're allowed to make use of animals. It doesn't demand a vegan society, a vegetarian society. We're allowed to eat animals. We're allowed to use animals. But there are limits on what we can do. You're not allowed to yoke an ox and a donkey together for plowing, because the ox is much stronger, much bigger than the donkey, and it would cause surus, pain for the donkey to be forced to keep up with what the ox is doing. If we are going to use an animal, we must use them in a way that does not cause unnecessary pain to that animal. If you have animals, you're supposed to feed them before you eat. All those with dogs and other pets running around. Okay? And they'll tell you that too. The dogs will certainly tell you, feed me first. I know that. But they say, you really should take care of the animal first. You don't leave an animal tied up in the sun. All of these things are not saying we can't make use of animals, but it's saying that we have to be reasonable in our usage of them and not cause any unnecessary suffering on their part. By the way, that's why my family and I and many others today won't eat veal, because we consider the production of veal to be something that is entirely indefensible, the way the animals have to be treated to have veal. Right? So we don't eat veal. I'm not saying it's not kosher. If somebody wants to eat veal, that's their choice. But we don't eat veal, because there's no way to have veal without causing unnecessary suffering to the animals, at least the way we have it today. We're told that, for example, if you see somebody's animal that is overburdened, you have to help. If they fall down under that burden, you have to help get them up so they shouldn't suffer. Another principle is lifnim shurat adin, going beyond the letter of the law. You can stand on the law and say this is necessary, or you can go beyond the letter of the law and say, like the issue with the rich man and the poor man. We find a discussion, you have workers, and the workers are carrying barrels of wine. They drop one of the barrels of wine, and the owner of the wine is out a lot of money, and not only does he not want to pay the workers, but he wants to get from them money to cover his loss. He may be able to claim in court legally that he's entitled. But if he's a mensch, he will say, all right, it was an accident. They didn't mean it. They weren't being careless. It happened. What can you do? So you're not always obligated to go according to the strictest interpretation of the law when you're dealing with another person and their needs. And often we find, after giving a law in the Torah, we will find the statement, Kadoshim, I can't Kadosh Anochi. You should be holy because I am holy. How is God holy? Or the idea we are to imitate God. How do you imitate God? So the rabbis say, just like God feeds the hungry, you should feed the hungry. God takes care of the poor, you should take care of the poor. God takes care of the naked, you should take care of the naked. That's what it means to be holy, to follow in the footsteps of God, to be God's agent, to help others when it's possible in your part to help them. That's an act of sanctity. There's also an interesting concept called Gemilut Chesed. Now, there's tzedakah and there's Gemilut Chesed. Tzedakah, which most people translate as charity, really comes from the word meaning righteousness or rightness. We have obligations to give to the poor. Charity comes from derives from Latin caritas, from the heart. Something you do out of your heart. Good-hearted person gives charity. Jewish tradition says no. You don't give charity because you have a good heart. You give charity because you have an obligation to give money, to give tzedakah. You have to help other people. If you're fortunate enough to have, then you have to be prepared to share with those that don't. That's what it means being righteous, being tzaddik, going the right way. Now, Gemilut Chesed is an act of kindness. Gemilut Chesed is different from tzedakah. Tzedakah is something you can do for somebody who needs help, who's poor. It's usually defined as giving money to institutions, to individuals, whom you give to, how much you give. Those are all questions you have to answer based upon your circumstances. But if Jeff Bezos, he came walking down the street and he tripped and he falls down, I should be prepared to give him a hand to help him stand up. I don't need to give him money. I'm doing an act of kindness to him. If somebody has a loss, they've lost someone that they love, we comfort them. They can be rich, they can be poor, male, female, Jew, Gentile. The idea of comforting a person who's in mourning is an act of kindness, Gemilut Chesed. We have an obligation to do that. When we talk about burial, we bury our loved ones. The act of burial is called a true act of loving kindness. A real example of Gemilut Chesed. Why? Well, let us say in life, I wash your back, you wash my back, right? I open the door for you one time, you might open the door for me. I help you in this circumstance, you might help me in that. There's always the possibility of a quid pro quo. But when I bury a person who has died, there's absolutely nothing that person can do for me. There's no way they can return that favor. That's why it's called a real act of chesed, Gemilut Chesed, a true act of chesed, to bury the dead. In Maimonides, going back in the Middle Ages, despite the fact we sometimes think of the Middle Ages being narrow, he says a Jew has an obligation to give tzedakah to the poor of the Jew and Gentile alike. A Jew has an obligation to bury the dead, whether they be Jewish or Gentile. Why? There's a concept called of Darchei Shalom, ways of peace. Now it's true, when you go through the traditional Jewish law, you look at the Talmud and you look at the Torah, there is often a distinction made between ins and outs. Those who are in and those who are out, as every society had. And so a Jew would take precedence over a non-Jew. Okay? If I'm giving tzedakah, my first obligation is give it to my family. Then next would be somebody in my neighborhood, someone in my city, someone in my country. There's circles around. Similarly, But if there's somebody else who needs help, I also have that obligation. And this concept of mipnei darchei shalom, for peace, I think is a very important element that has to be taken into consideration when deciding Jewish law today. In other words, if we want to live in a world in which people care for each other regardless of the differences that they have, then we have to work every way we can to find ways of peace. So it matters not what that other person looks like, what that other person believes, where they observe the Sabbath, they observe Sunday, or they don't observe anything, if they eat veal or they don't eat veal, or they eat pork or they don't eat pork. Those are all irrelevant to the fact that that's a human being that's in front of me. And I have an obligation to care for that individual. Any person in the world. And I rely upon the concept of darchei shalom, ways of peace. You will find, when we talked earlier about the issue of the COVID. I know that there are some Jewish business people who have payas and in dark coats and black hat, and they make sure they fast in all the fast days. They're as kosher as can be. But when somebody comes into the store and they see them, I can take advantage of that individual. And if he's not Jewish, of course I can. That's not the ideal. Mipnei darchei shalom means if a person comes in, I treat everybody the same. I give everybody the same credence. I give everybody the same standard of service, everybody the same standard of behavior. And so, that to me is one of the most important elements that we find in ethical treatment. That we have an obligation to treat every human being as a human being. Going back to that Mishnah, which I say I interpret it to mean every life. Each and every life is precious. If you save a single life, it's like you save an entire world. And to think otherwise is to think very narrowly, because you never know. Even if it's just to be on self-serving. I can't think there's anything more self-serving than being altruistic in the world. Because if everybody was altruistic, we'd have a much better world. So it's self-serving. It makes me better. It helps me out. If I need help, I'll get help. So what? That's the thing. So to me, that's the Jewish ideal of ethics and moral behavior, etc. Any kinds of questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Can you speak to if what they say? I know somewhere it says that if you embarrass someone, it's akin to killing someone.
Yeah. To embarrass someone in public is considered to be the equivalent of murder. One of the things they say is, when a person gets embarrassed, sometimes the blood flows out of their face, right? And you're spilling blood, as it were. So we're supposed to avoid embarrassing a person. Even in private, we're not supposed to embarrass somebody. All the more so in public. Now, sometimes that may be necessary, right? There's certain circumstances. Everything has to be, weighed according to the circumstances. Just like lying. Sometimes a little white lie to preserve a peace is okay. Even maybe a major lie to preserve peace in life is okay. Right? But normally you want to be honest. You want to be able to be relied upon. So life requires us to examine circumstances every time. But just to embarrass someone, the rabbis were very strict in that area. They didn't like using nicknames for people, because sometimes the nicknames are embarrassing. Even if the person is used to it, is okay with them, they have a serious feelings that you should not do so. Okay, Sarah? Anybody else? Okay, next week we will talk about Purim, because it's around the corner. And if you have and we will look at the Megillat Esther, we'll go over the Megillat Esther, the story of Esther, and the observances for Purim, okay? So I'll see everybody next week. Have a good week, stay healthy, and all those good things.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good night.